All right, today we're doing something a little different. This isn't your typical market update. We're going deep. We're doing a forensic investigation into a hidden systemic risk that's building right now just beneath the surface of the institutional crypto world. So let's just get right into it.
And I'm not saying that for effect. This whole analysis started as a pretty routine look at some new regulations, but what it uncovered, well, it's a multi-layered danger that could trap billions in institutional capital and spark a crisis that looks a lot like the worst financial meltdowns we've ever seen.
So where does a fire like this usually start? Almost always, it starts with something that looks completely harmless, even boring. And in this case, it was a series of seemingly standard regulatory updates coming out of Washington.
Okay, let's really break this timeline down, because the sequence here is absolutely critical. In late 2025 and early 2026, we saw three rapid-fire moves. First, on December 11th, the old guard, the DTCC, gets a big head start. Then, January 12th, a new bill pops up trying to ban yield on stablecoins, a huge part of DeFi. And then, on January 28th, the hammer drops. The SEC puts out guidance that pretty much reclassifies a ton of wrapped crypto assets as non-compliant. This wasn't an accident, it was a coordinated attack.
At first, our thinking was pretty straightforward. When the regulators changed the rules on these wrapped assets, like wrapped ETH, big institutions are going to be legally forced to dump them, and dump them fast. That forced selling, it creates a temporary discount. And that means a classic arbitrage trade for anyone quick enough to buy the discounted asset, unwrap it, and make a profit on the difference. Simple, right?
But, and this is where everything starts to unravel, that simple idea immediately led to a much more dangerous question. If a big fund gets a call from compliance saying, you have 48 hours to sell every wrapped asset you own, where do they go to get their hands on them? You'd think the answer is obvious, their custodian. But as we're about to see, it's not obvious at all.
And that question leads us right to the first domino. There is a crisis brewing inside the very places that are supposed to be the safest vaults in the digital world, the qualified custodians. This is what we're calling the hidden custody trap.
So how does this trap actually work? It's a practice they brought over from traditional finance called securities lending. See, to squeeze out a little extra yield, custodians lend out a chunk of their clients' assets to market makers and hedge funds. And the key thing to understand here is this isn't some hidden bug, it's a feature. It's right there in the custody agreement, usually buried on page 47 of the fine print.
Based on what we know about industry practices, we're estimating that right now, somewhere between 30 and 40% of all institutionally held wrapped assets, they aren't actually sitting in the custodian's vault. They're lent out. They're out in the wild being used as collateral for somebody else's trade.
And here is the massive catch. When a custodian needs to get those assets back, it's not like flipping a switch. The typical recall window on these loans is 7 days, sometimes even longer. You can already see the giant mismatch, right? Compliance is screaming sell in 48 hours, but the assets themselves are locked up in a loan that takes a week or more to get back.
And look, if you think this is all just theory, it's not. We've seen this movie before. Remember Gemini Earn? It was a regulated product from a qualified custodian. And when it went down, customers were locked out of their own money for 18 months. This isn't just a small delay, it's a complete freeze.
So you see what happens, right? When every single institution calls their custodian on the same Monday morning, demanding their assets, the custodian physically can't do it. They're short 30 to 40% of the assets, so they're forced to gate withdrawals. They put up a nice little banner on their website saying they're experiencing operational delays. And just like that, institutions are trapped. They are legally required to sell something they literally cannot access. And that's just layer one.
Okay, so now let's go to the next layer, because that custody trap, that's just the fuse. It's what ignites a much bigger, much more dangerous explosion in the murky world of crypto private credit, what is basically a true shadow banking system.
All right, stick with me here, because the amount of leverage is it's insane. It starts with a crypto fund borrowing cash using its WST ETH as collateral. Then, a private credit fund takes that loan, bundles it up with hundreds of other loans just like it, and creates this really complex product called a collateralized loan obligation, a CLO. Then they slice that CLO up into different pieces or tranches, from super risky to supposedly safe. And who buys that safest AAA-rated piece? Well, a lot of the time, it's a pension fund for teachers or firefighters, just looking for a safe and steady 8% yield.
But then, boom, the SEC guidance drops, and that WST ETH being used as collateral, it's instantly recategorized from a high-quality digital asset to a potential unregistered security. The value of that collateral is now totally questionable, and that triggers an absolute tsunami of margin calls all across the system. Borrowers are getting calls to post new, compliant collateral, which of course they don't have. This forces the private credit fund to start fire-selling the Wisteeth into a market that's already getting crushed by all the other institutions selling. This forced selling just craters the price of the collateral, which in turn causes the entire CLO structure to breach its safety rules and basically implode. The value collapses. That AAA safe investment is suddenly worth pennies on the dollar, completely wiping out the investment for those pension funds. And that is how a weird, niche crypto problem can suddenly and violently spill over and vaporize the retirement funds of everyday people. So, a chain reaction of bad assumptions, hidden leverage, and complex financial products collapsing. If all of this is starting to sound eerily familiar, well, it should. We are looking at a direct and frankly deeply unsettling parallel to the 2008 global financial crisis.
I mean, just look at this comparison. The mistakes are rhyming almost perfectly. Back in 2008, the fatal mistake was assuming that a mortgage in Florida was somehow different from one in California, so bundling them all together created safety through diversification. The reality was, the entire housing market was one big asset class, and it all fell together. Today, investors are making the same mistake. They assume REIT from Lido and REIT from Rocket Pool are different, uncorrelated assets. But the reality is, they're all just liquid staking derivatives, and they all have the exact same regulatory risk. When that SEC rule hits, they're all going to fall together. The vehicle is a little different, CLOs instead of CDOs, but the flawed logic and the victims are exactly the same.
But here's the thing that makes this crisis potentially so much worse. And it's one word: speed. The 2008 crisis played out in slow motion. It took about 18 months for the whole thing to really unfold. This crypto crisis? It could happen in 30 to 60 days. Why? Because crypto markets never sleep, they're 24/7, settlement is instant, and there are no circuit breakers. There's no time for panicked weekend meetings to hammer out a rescue plan. It just happens, and it happens fast. And this might be the most crucial point of this entire breakdown. In 2008, when the banks were collapsing, the government stepped in. The Fed, the Treasury, they created TARP and all these other bailout programs. In crypto, there is no government backstop. None. There's no crypto TARP. There's no lender of last resort. When these funds and custodians fail, they just fail.
Okay, so let's pull all of this together. This isn't just some theoretical exercise or a far-off prediction. This is an urgent warning about a chain reaction that has already started. And you can think of it as 3 dominoes, lined up and ready to fall.
The first domino? It's already fallen. That happened on January 28th when the SEC guidance came out and reclassified these assets. The second domino is wobbling right now. We can see the capital flight on-chain, you can feel the stress building on the custodians, and that means the third domino, the collapse of these private credit structures and the chaos that follows, it's not a question of if, it's a question of when.
And this leaves us with one final, very pointed question. What's happened here is that a regulatory action has created a massive imbalance, a huge asymmetry in the system. And when that happens, the market will always exploit it. So the only question left is, which side of that trade do you want to be on? The side that's trapped by the rules, or the side that actually understands them?